Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. My name's Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have all your property related questions answered by our team of experts. Joining me today for I think the third time is Hayley Andrews. Hayley, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good trip down to London?
Yes.
Great stuff. I say you get here quicker than I do and I only live across the road, but anyway. Hayley's a property developer, investor and co-founder of Your Freedom Empire, so welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
And joining for the first time is Ben Stroud, a very old friend of mine and work colleague. Used to be with one of the world's leading property agencies, I think, but has taken the brave step to go out on his own. He's co-founder of Grange London Estate Agents and New Home Specialist. Ben, welcome to you.
Stephen, thank you. Great to be here and honoured to be invited.
Good. Well, I did get your email last night, which said take it easy on me, so I'll try and make it as painless as I can for you. Okay, but welcome to you, Ben, anyway. Okay, Hayley, I'm going to start off with you. Your first question is this. I know that this question has been previously asked on earlier shows, but do the rates of return between the north and south of England remain significantly different since the COVID pandemic struck? Property is generally cheaper the further north one goes, and therefore the percentage rates of return have been historically higher. But in the south, a lot of towns have suffered a migration of tenants, often to countryside, due to the working from home COVID regulations. So what do you think?
I don't think that we've seen a huge change, to be honest. There has been a lot of people moving away from the city centres to more rural parts of the country. But I personally don't think that, I don't focus on the south, so I very much focus on cash flow. So I do focus more north and in the Midlands. I think if you're investing for capital growth, then of course you will always get that in the south. There are obviously exceptions to the rule, and there are areas that are performing better. There's lots of micro areas. On a whole, London hasn't performed well through COVID, and I think we already started to see a decline in demand 2018. You probably see that as well.
Yeah.
And this was probably more your question than mine, but yes.
Well, listen, we're all accused here of being too London-centric, so we say we're asking you for the northern perspective. There
yeah, so I mean, I would say still now, and I suspect still to continue for many years to come. If you were investing for cash flow, you would go further north, and if you were investing for capital growth, south is where you will get a quicker uplift in value.
Okay, uplift in value. But we did an interview with one of the leading property portals who did a rental survey recently. And they were seeing this huge exodus from city centres to outlying areas, let's put it that way, particularly in the north, in the bigger towns like Manchester, Birmingham, that sort of thing. Do you think that will continue?
I think that we will have a market correction, and I think things will resume as normal. I think people that have moved away once COVID has gone and we learn to live with it, I think people will return back to the capital and back to the town centres. I don't think that it's going to be a long-term trend.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I have to tell you, I used to live out of London. He'll know because we were working together at the same time. Travelling in from Henley-on-Thames was lovely when the train worked.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if it didn't, and you were standing on the station at 6 o'clock in the morning and it said, I'm sorry, this train's not going to happen today, what you faced with, £100 taxi ride or staying at home for the day. So very, very difficult. It doesn't always work, does it? I think city centres are important too.
Yeah, and I think you've got to look at the long-term goal as well. I mean, obviously, the cities always perform better, they recover quicker. It is a capital market. You've got to ask yourself, am I a capital investor? Or am I looking for capital growth, or am I looking for cash flow? Or are you looking for a bit of both? I mean, I have the best of both worlds, being based in Birmingham, sorry.
Was it a Freudian slip, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it?
Okay. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think that yield is obviously a function of price and the rent you're getting. I think the one part of a country that probably has suffered in terms of price drops this year is central London, is zone
I think we dropped 2% last month, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly, and you know, arguably parts of Zone 2, and I think that. So I think actually you've seen relative rise in yield in central London, perhaps compared to other parts of the country, although you're right, the rent has dropped as well. But I think you will see the stats you just mentioned about an exodus of people, I think, is almost looking in the rearview mirror. It's starting to open up. You know, we're getting busier from where I sit, and we're seeing more and more people coming back. Foreign students just starting to fly back in. So I think you'll see the rents pick up again. But you'll have that window, you know, this summer, this autumn, where you can still buy at 5 to 10% less than you could a year ago. So I think the yields have tightened slightly between London and the north. Would be my take on it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Very
But
good.
would you say that it's significantly enough if you're focusing on cash flow to actually say, well, okay, now it opens up the north?
No, I think if
the south.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think if you're after 6% yields, you're not going to get that in London.
Yeah, I mean right now you probably are getting a slightly better yield if you're purchasing in London than you were 2 years ago, for example. But it's still not a cash flow market, is it? You're still not getting the same yields that you would up north, for example.
Yeah, I agree.
Or in the Midlands even, where you get a bit of both, a bit of capital uplift year on year and decent cash flow.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for that, you mentioned earlier, that sweet spot between a decent, you know, a respectable yield and the opportunity to make some money. I think because central London's dropped, and you know, it's quite an interesting opportunity in that respect.
Yeah. But Ben, you know, your new business is effectively focusing on one of the hotspots of London, which is Paddington Basin.
Yeah,
terrific development there, great looking properties, great architecture.
Yeah,
but it's going to suffer, if not already, the same as Canary Wharf suffered. You know, I live in a building across the road. We've got an Olympic-sized swimming pool. We've got a 2-storey gym and all the rest of it. And by golly, don't I know it when I get the service charge bill. And I often think, well, for investors, I mean, you know, it's my home, but for investors, this must be tragic news, you know, because we know what developers do. They'll keep the service charge down for the first couple of years while they're selling, and then goes through the roof.
Yeah. Which is, and I think a lot of investors have learnt that the hard way. And I think looking forward, developers will perhaps not install the amount of amenity that they would have done in the past. They'll keep the service charge low. For example, a gym, they'll just accept that there's a couple of good local private gyms around the corner and not have a gym, as long as you've got, you know, decent concierge, 1 or 2 bells and whistles. I think the important thing is keeping the service charge down. And you're right. I think the last few years there's almost been an arms race to have the best developments with the best cinema, and it makes it yield-wise, it makes it a problem for investors. Yeah. But I think that will change. Developers will have to react to that.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, Ben. Well, let's move on to your first question on the programme then. Let's see how you do. This is one very pertinent to down here, actually. I live in a block of flats numbering about 200. I wish to sell my property, but there's an owner selling a similar property in the block, almost 30% less than the price I was advised was the market value of my place. I understand the seller is desperate for cash, hence the greatly reduced price. What advice would you give me to minimise the detrimental effect on my proposed sale? Because of the level of my mortgage, I simply can't give away 30% of the property's value.
Yeah,
I mean, that's an ever-growing problem, isn't it?
That's a big hit, 30%. I mean, look, this is a hypothetical question, I think. The first thing to say is we haven't actually seen that kind of distress. We've seen drops in central London of 5 to 10, maybe 12% in the last year to 18 months. And actually prices, probably from 2015 onwards, we've had tax increases, we've had Brexit, now we've had COVID. So, you know, they've dropped quite a bit. I think there's something like 22 to 25% below the peak in 2014. So I think 30% isn't the figure, but if it was, as the owner of the property that you wanted to sell, I would say, well, look, let that distress sale happen, sit back, reassess. If there's a line of people also wanting to sell at 30%,
you've got a problem.
You've got a problem. And look, I don't have a magic bullet for a tough market. If we had another, you know, credit crunch style scenario, then you do have a problem. But I suspect that if that's a one-off, you need to, then it becomes all about how you present your property, the way you furnish it, the
Well,
agent
I
you use.
was just going to say, what tips have you both got for anybody to what shall I say, in these blocks where you've got repetitive architecture, very little difference structurally in the flats? How do you get your flat to differentiate itself?
It's funny because I actually had this question come to me recently for a lady that I've been working with, and she owns properties around London, and she was struggling to rent her property out. So it wasn't for sale, it was for rent. But then doing some due diligence and having a look at, there was it was saturated. Every other flat in that block was up for rent, and they were all identical. Checked out the listing, and the wording wasn't great, the pictures were terrible, it wasn't staged, there was old furniture in there, old curtains up, and it was actually a really nice flat. So my advice to her was, make sure that your advert stands out, make sure that your property, your listing stands out, get the property staged. You can do that very cheaply and actually fetch a higher rent as a result of it as well. Staging can do so much for your property.
Yes. Well, I can remember years ago, I was a partner of quite a nice firm of chartered surveyors down here, and I met the senior valuer, and he said to me, whenever your clients ask what they've got to do to sell, he said, let me show you this. And we stood outside a building, and it was just a block of windows, all looking the same. And he said, what is it that's going to make that one in the middle, up there to the right, be different from all the others? And he says, that's what you must persuade your client to put his mind to. And it's exactly as you said.
Yes.
It's presentation.
Yeah, couldn't agree.
You need to be rememberable. I mean, I was flicking through the listings, and there was loads, 30, 40. It was ridiculous. And all of them identical, all of them the same rent. They wasn't asking too much money for the property. The rent wasn't the problem. The fact that they were getting lost in the amount of listings that were there or available just wasn't allowing that particular unit to stand out at all. Well,
it's the same ethos that you must apply when we have these changes in market conditions. I mean, Ben, you will know as well as anybody else that, you know, the trouble with agency is that when it's good times, all you need is order takers, and you just tick them off and they go. When it's a bad market, you spend all day telling your clients why you haven't sold their property and doing very, very little else. So it's, you know, it's sort of feast or famine, isn't it, really?
Well, this is why I invest for cash flow, because fluctuations in the market really doesn't
so
matter.
we're all moving to Birmingham then,
yeah,
are we? Okay.
Good.
All right, well, thank you both very much. That's all we've got time for this half of the show. Join me again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Hayley Andrews and Ben Stroud. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Hayley, your second question. What do the panel think about the government's initiative to force landlords to accept the presence of pets in their tenanted properties? Now, that's a pretty narrow question in some respects, but I'll talk to you after I've heard your answer.
Oh, this is going to open a whole load of kind of worms, isn't it?
Is that a pun? Is it to do with the people wanting to keep worms?
Worms. Does that class as a pet? I'm not sure it does.
We'll see.
So the question is referring to the government's model tenancy that was brought in January this year. It is a recommendation, however, so force is perhaps not the correct word. It's more of a recommendation. Whether it will become law, it's not yet law. So it is recommended that landlords use in this tenancy. It is recommended that landlords are not allowed to put a blanket ban on pets. However, you can actually object as a landlord. There are reasons that you can object.
Where would you object?
So the tenant has to inform the landlord, ask permission.
Would it be a first tier tribunal sort of thing?
It will be a conversation between the landlord and the tenant. So I think there's an argument here that isn't yet an argument. It's still very much down to the tenant and the landlord to communicate. The landlord can determine whether the pet is well behaved, if the property is suitable for a pet. For example, if you're in a high-rise flat, then it's not appropriate to have a pet in a high-rise flat. If you are working long hours, it's not appropriate to have a pet in the property. If the property is small and you want to have a Great Dane, then the property isn't fit for pets. Also, with a lot of the high-rise flats and things like that, you will have in the head lease restrictions around pets being able to be in that property. So there's lots of reasons that you would be able to object. Also, it will come under the tenant referencing process as well, won't it? As part of that process, qualifying the tenant.
Don't you think there's two difficulties here that I see? One, you're quite right, it's the suitability, and Ben and I worked on a building down here which was, I think, one block was probably 30 odd stories, another block 40, I think, from memory. Quite a number of times we've heard the managing agents having to listen to complaints and RSPCA being called for dogs being locked up and making noise all day long because they're effectively being locked up in a glass box.
Yes.
You know, and totally unsuitable environment. And I think that there's that. I think though one of the concerns I have is government interjecting into matters of commerciality of property. I don't really like the idea of the government dictating the terms of leases. I think you're absolutely right. It should be a matter of agreement between landlord and tenant. I think there needs to be fairly strict guidelines because otherwise, you know, if you've got a block of, you know, 1,000 apartments like one of these ones just being built down here, you wouldn't want to have 1,000 conversations with people about what they can and can't do. You've got a lease, and I always say to people with leases who have difficulties with landlords and vice versa, look, you've both seen the lease, you've both signed it, you've both either moved in and let you be moved in, so why don't you just do what the lease says? It saves a lot of trouble. Yeah. So I don't like government interjection into that process.
I think the reason it's a topic is because we are, we're a pet nation, and I think statistically you're looking at something like 78% of the population having pets, furry friends, cat, dog, some more exotic animals maybe, but we are a pet nation, and currently only 7% of the private rental market allows pets or advertised pet-friendly properties. So there's positives and negatives. Obviously, as a landlord, we want to protect our investment. We want to make sure that the tenant is, of course, not causing damage. Under the new the model tenancy that the government brought in January, the tenant is actually responsible for any damages, but actually recovering those costs, as you're probably fully aware of, is a different scenario. But I think it's more about looking at the solution. It's not law yet. If it does become law, there are ways as landlords that we can still protect ourselves, while with the tenant fee ban, we're not allowed to pass those, charge extra or take a bigger deposit or anything like that. We can put the rents up. There's no rent. We're not, there's no regulation around rents at this moment in time. We can increase the rent, can't we? I suppose, and I think that's what will happen.
The whole difficulty here is where do you stop? I mean, again, Ben and I have worked together, and you see in these buildings, somebody will come in and say, well, look, I know it says no pets, but it's only this big. And then, of course, the next person comes in and says, well, it's only this big. And then it's only this big.
And size doesn't really matter.
It's the smallest ones.
I was just going to say,
make the most noise.
Pets do cause a lot of damage, and I've within my portfolio, I have no pets. That is on my, we don't take pets in. And it has been on a conversation basis, and there are lots of tenants that will just take pets in without informing you, and then on inspection it's I'm looking after it for a friend, or and quite clearly it's their pet. But I do, on a positive note, I do find that tenants with pets tend to stay in the properties for longer. So,
because they don't let you see one.
I think playing devil's advocate, there's a lot of people, especially post-COVID, who live on their own, who now work from home,
Yeah.
you know, if not all the week, most of the week. And it's easy to get lonely. So you're having a pet for some people is important, but it also comes with great responsibility, and
It really
it costs
does.
a lot. So it's down to you if you want to go and buy a Rottweiler and train it to hunt rabbits and then live with it in a one-bed flat. That's not going to work. It's down. I think the impetus should be on the tenant to prove whether it's pet referencing, some kind of pet passport. I'm not sure how it works.
And
but
and at the moment there's nothing like that in place, which is why, you know, you can object, and there's lots of reasons you can object. So if you are a landlord and you're not wanting pets in your property, find one of those reasons.
Okay.
Or put the rent up. You can take out insurance as well.
All right, we must move on. Ben, your second question. And this is particularly relevant to you as you're in one of these areas. Your area of speciality, as I said, is Paddington Basin, which is one of the new stops for Crossrail, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
So new estate agents are opening up along the proposed station locations for London's Crossrail. Do the panel think that property values in these areas will rise significantly as and when Crossrail eventually starts operating?
As and when.
As and when.
As and when is the key phrase
That's
here.
the question.
Yeah. Long and short answer, it will have an effect. It has to. I think the single biggest driver of property prices, major infrastructure investment, be it a new airport, be it a new train line, so that it will have an effect. With Crossrail, we had the initial excitement around it when it was announced, and you know, sort of a few years afterwards.
And how long ago was it announced? I can't remember. Is it 10 years?
09?
11 years? 12 years?
Just one guy with a spade digging a tunnel. But so if we had that the initial announcement, there was a rise in prices as a result of that, which also coincided with London's recent boom. But the momentum went a little bit. But Crossrail's being tested at the moment. It is actually now due to open in the next 6 months in central London. And when it does, amongst that fanfare, I think you'll see a sort of renewed vigour, and you will see property near stations outperform the wider market because of what it means. The obvious next question is, well, COVID, surely people don't want to travel on a packed train anymore, which is a valid point. One thing I'll say about Crossrail is the trains are bigger. They're actually overground trains which just go through a bigger tunnel. They're not tube trains. And I think people are tired of sitting in traffic jams.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, look, Hayley, we'll ask you about HS2 next time, shall we?
Yes,
see how that's going to affect you. Well, look, that's all we've got time for today. So a big thank you to Hayley Andrews. Thank you very much for coming down,
Thank you for
Hayley.
having me.
And to Ben Stroud, co-founder of Grange London. Ben, good luck with the new business. We hope you do very well. We hope you see you again on Property Question Time too. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
That's all from me, Stephen Galpin. So join me next time on Property Question Time.